Good morning, neighbors. Diane Margolin, Huntington Matters. This is installment number 3 in our 2024 election candidate interview series. We have the distinct honor, because this is a first for us, to have a congressman with us. So thank you so much for coming and joining us. This is Congressman LALOTA. So we're going to get to know him today. As you can imagine, schedules are super tight. We're going to dive right in. So Congressman, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to step forward to serve the community in this way?
Awesome. First off, it's great to be with our audience, whether you're tuning in live or you're going to watch this later on. Great to interact. We're about 11 or 12 days from Election Day. Please, no matter who you're going to vote for, please cast your ballot. It's important that we advocate for our values, for our community and our country, and I hope that everybody comes to vote before November 5th. You can vote absentee, you can vote early, you can vote on Election Day. I suggest voting early. You can do so safely on a machine. It's all good. Regardless who you vote for, get out and vote, please.
We love that. We love the voting early. It is such a great service to our neighbors.
Yeah.
If elected, what projects or goals are at the top of your list that you want to accomplish?
Well, let me answer your first question. I didn't tell the audience about myself. So I want to tell the audience a little about myself. Maybe it relates a little bit to what I said during the first part. I used to be the elections commissioner here in Suffolk County. Very big proponent of everybody participating in that process. I was also the chief of staff in the county legislature here before Congress, but way before that I was a Navy man. I went through St. Anthony's High School here, met my high school sweetheart at St. Anthony's High School, went off to the Naval Academy and served 11 years in a Navy uniform, overseas 3 different times, visited 20 different countries, and at that time really fell in love with our awesome country. Came back home, did some of those jobs I just mentioned. In addition, I used to be the Veterans Casework Director for then Congressman Steve Israel. Worked on both sides of the aisle during my work for government. Did that for a year, and then afterwards worked for the State Senate for 4 years, and like I mentioned earlier, the Elections Commissioner here in Suffolk for 7, and the Chief of Staff in the county legislature for 1. And it's with that perspective, that foundation, that I approach my job every day in Congress, ensuring that we put community and country before anything else. That's why I serve. I've been ranked more bipartisan than 85% of Congress. I've passed more bills than 95% of Congress. I brought home $150 million to help life be more affordable and have our quality of life be better here. It's that perspective that I serve in Congress. I'm sure we've all tuned in from time to time. There's a lot of craziness that goes on in Congress, a lot of partisan bickering. I try not to be a part of that. I've had the equal amount of interviews on CNN as I've had Fox News Channel. I want to be challenged by people with different perspectives. I want to make myself available to everybody in the community in the district to ensure that they understand who I am, my values are, and it's always putting this great country and community first.
Great, and thank you for spending so much time in Huntington.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But you do.
Yeah. It's
you come to quite a bit here.
Yeah.
And it's more than the usual.
I have a lot of roots here in Huntington, not only having gone through St. Anthony's High School here. My wife teaches at Northport High School. My oldest, my 15-year-old, attends St. Anthony's. She's a sophomore now. She's on the swim team. I'm often dropping her off at the Half Hollow Hills West Pool at 5:30 in the morning sometimes. Sometimes it gets a little tough doing that, but we have a lot of roots here in Huntington. While at St. Anthony's, I was on the crew team, and we rode just a little bit, a couple miles that way from here we are. A lot of love, a lot of roots in Huntington, a lot of good pizza places here in Huntington.
What's your favorite?
Little Vincent's is up next.
Cold cheese?
I do like the cold cheese. Usually that's a late night.
Usually
that's not an afternoon thing. If we're having fun late at night, that's usually a thing that we'll do.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Back to question 2. If elected, if re-elected, what projects or goals are at the top of your list that you would like to accomplish?
Yeah, let's name a couple. And my constituents and I are very interested in the southern border and what is happening at the southern border right now. These are policy choices that have been made right now by the Biden administration to open that border up. We need him to reverse those policies, to close that border down and make it safer like it was years ago. We want good legal migration. Our immigration quota should match our labor needs. Legal migration is an absolute foundational principle for our country. We're all some descendants of migrants at some point in time in our life, but we need to do it legally. It definitely needs to comport with our economic needs here. We should have a good asylum process. But what has happened in the last few years is totally abhorrent. It's made America less safe. 222,000 fentanyl deaths, 325,000 young migrants lost throughout the country, many of them victims of child and sex trafficking, and a $5 billion budget hole in the 5 boroughs for the migrant crisis where they're giving them free hotels and health care. These are all policy choices that have made life more difficult for us. There are solutions on the table that I have supported, including H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023 that we passed in May of 2023 before this issue became totally political. We also passed 12 bipartisan individual House bills. Both parties supported them to make incremental process on the border. And I think that those are worthy of a large amount of discussion and debate in the Democrat-controlled Senate. Unfortunately, they haven't yet undertaken a single one of those 12 very good bills. One of them is my bill. Actually, I have two bills. Two of those 12 bipartisan bills are mine that my team and I authored and got through the House. One of them in particular, this is the No Bailouts for Sanctuary Cities Act, which states no more additional funds for the migrant crisis in New York until they change their policies. These issues are policy driven. The more free hotels and healthcare they give to migrants, the more the migrants are going to want to come there. So what I have said is, hey, listen, until you turn those off, the free stuff off, you can't get additional federal dollars for that. So you asked me about my priorities. Priorities, one is the border. Two is the economy. A lot of us are working paycheck to paycheck, putting more and more money on our credit cards, having less opportunities, our families, our kids, vacations, everywhere in between. And it's a cause of high inflation. Inflation is happening for two reasons, in my opinion. One, energy prices generally affect everything else. We're the United States of America, and we're blessed with 20 years of supply of energy underneath our ground. We should safely and cleanly extract that from the ground. But concurrently, we need to also explore alternative energies, wind, battery, solar, everything else, especially where neighborhoods want them. We should do that. In parallel, we need to pare back some federal spending. 25 years of deficit spending has increased inflation to the point where it's hurting a lot of us. It's a hidden tax. We have to pare back some federal spending while protecting Medicare and Social Security especially. But we need to ensure that we cut some of that spending. We did that in this Congress, found $2.1 trillion over 10 years in the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023. Both parties ultimately got together and helped out with that. I'd like to brag a little bit. My party led the way on that. We got to do a little more on that, but both parties need to work together to do so. I'm part of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, the Bipartisan For Country Caucus. We all got to roll up our sleeves and work together. This debt situation we're in, where we have $36 trillion in debt now, a debt to GDP ratio of 120%, is a bipartisan problem. Both parties have gotten us here. Neither party, whether they control the House, the Senate, the White House in the last 25 years, has passed a balanced budget. We need to work together on that. Another thing is, I'm going to get to 3 and 4 on my priorities.
Go ahead.
Third priority is our standing in the world. Our standing in the world is very important right now. Right now, the world is a tinderbox. You see conflict in and around Israel, Ukraine. You see China getting very aggressive. And it's because, in my opinion, of weakness that we're projecting from this administration. Just like Reagan said this. Reagan said weakness invites aggression. And if you want to achieve peace, you have to be appearing strong. And right now, it's the opposite. There's a lot of equivocation around Israel vis-a-vis Iran. Years ago, President Obama gave pallets of cash, $1.7 billion in currency to the Iranians when they were about to be bankrupt. That fueled their war machine. They're using their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, to attack our best friend Israel. Does not have to be that way. We should be stronger. We should not facilitate anything that looks anything like the Iran nuke deal. These folks want to have us dead. They chant death to America. They also want to wipe Israel off of the map. These folks are the ones who did the first World Trade Center bombing. They killed 17 sailors in the USS Cole in the fall of 2000. They took down the towers in 2001. They committed the atrocities of October 7th. That ideology in that region needs to be choked off through tougher sanctions. We need to be serious about that, just like we need to be serious with Russia. President Biden, unfortunately, relieved sanctions on Russia 9 months before it invaded Ukraine, allowed them to build their pipeline into Europe, sell its natural gas, and fund its war machine there in that Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Unfortunately, at the same time, he killed our pipeline here, the Keystone Pipeline here. These things are poor policy choices that have emboldened America's adversaries to attack America's allies. That's wrong. Likewise, we also saw on our TV the spy balloon from the Chinese Communist Party coming across the Pacific Ocean, all across America. We knew about it all the time. We should have shot it down. It's unfortunate that there was more appeasement in there as well. We should be stronger. Final issue, affordability back here, specifically on Long Island. We need to do better. A lot of us here understand what the root causes of the issue are, and it's the high taxes in the state. New York State has the dubious distinction of having the highest effective taxes in the entire nation. We know it. Those of us who live here in these New York suburbs have felt it for quite some time. We have the highest effective sales, property, income taxes of any state in the nation. It's the reason why so many of our friends, our neighbors, our family are moving to the Carolinas and Florida. We need to do better at that. We need our colleagues in the state government to do better at that. But at the same time, the federal government has a responsibility too. And not just the low-income tax credit, not just the first-time homebuyer tax credit, but SALT. Yeah, something I've been fighting a lot by. We're getting to it, folks. It's the most important thing to me. State and local tax deduction. SALT is the acronym for it. It essentially says this: the money that you pay into your property taxes and your state income taxes is deductible from your federal taxes. And it had been the policy for years and years and years. Some say it's 100 years. I think it might be even longer than that. I think it goes back to Lincoln. Nevertheless, it says this: you shouldn't be taxed twice. If your state and local governments are taxing you, that amount ought to be deductible from your federal taxes. We all should agree on that, especially as New Yorkers. We recognize that it's most important to us because of the onerous taxes we have to pay, and we need our friends and colleagues from the other side of the aisle in Albany to do better at that, to make it less onerous for us here. But concurrently, we need to fight for a higher cap. In 2017, they passed a tax bill in Washington, bill that I wasn't present for, I would have voted against, that capped at $10,000 the amount that you could deduct from your state and local taxes on your federal taxes. We need to get a higher limit. Higher. And there's a lot of controversy going on in this campaign, but let me shoot you straight as to some of the history and where I stand in this. So my party limited it, unfortunately, to $10,000 in 2017. That bill is wrong and needs to be fixed. My colleagues from the other side of the aisle brag about how if you elect them, they're going to reinstate SALT. And I appreciate their efforts, but they did not deliver on their promise. In 2021 and 2022, Democrats had control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, and didn't do anything on SALT. That's still a cap that was set in 2017, remained despite them having control of everything for those 2 years in 21 and 22.
Tons and tons of advocacy and feedback by New Yorkers, by all our legislators, pushing them to do this, and it didn't get done.
It means it's one of our lifebloods that we need here on Long Island to help it be more affordable here. But the other party didn't get it done. So when I got to Congress about 2 years ago, must have been like 21, 22 months ago, started working very hard on this, built coalitions. I'm part of the bipartisan SALT caucus, working with fellow lawmakers throughout the country, especially from blue state suburbs. That's where it hits us the most. These high tax states and the suburbs especially have high property taxes, and we recognize that this SALT deduction helps ease some of those high taxes in those blue state suburbs. So we built coalitions, both parties got together, lobbied a lot of folks. And I'll disclose this: there's two factions in Congress who generally don't like SALT. On the far left, they see it as welfare to rich people. They think that we're all rich. They think that we live on Long Island, and because we own a home that might be worth $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, that's somehow rich. In some other parts of the country, that is quite wealthy. But if that's the value of your home, chances are you're not rich here on Long Island. Chances are you're getting by paycheck to paycheck, you get a lot of money in your credit cards, and you're just trying to live and keep your head above water. So you have some folks on the left who think it's welfare to rich people. It's not. You got some folks on the right who think it's a subsidy to the largesse of blue states who don't have discretion in their state budgets. Regardless of that, I recognize this. New York State...
because we're getting taxed twice.
Well, no, they think...
Because essentially they're keeping more of our money.
My colleagues on the far right say, listen, Albany should straighten themselves out. They should stop spending so much money. They should stop having so much terrible regulations. Why do my constituents in those states have to subsidize your state's largesse? And I say, listen... What's right is New York State is a donor state. We send more to Washington than we get back, especially the case here on Long Island. So if my red state colleagues who have that opinion, which is wrong, want them to keep their money, we keep ours, I'd sign up for that deal. Because if we all kept our money and we're in a donor state, we would be able to afford a lot more. Nevertheless, there's always common ground, usually somewhere in the middle. We've built a lot of consensus in the middle on this issue. And on February 14th of 2024, folks at home should Google this, we were able to get a bill toward the House floor that would increase the cap. We finally negotiated with our party, and we were blocking some of the legislation. We told them that we weren't going to vote on anything else until we had the opportunity to vote on this. And on February 14th of 2024, 95% of House Republicans voted to advance my bill that would have increased the SALT cap. And unfortunately, none of my Democrat friends from the other side of the aisle, even those who are on the SALT caucus, voted against it. We need to do better. That should not be the final excuse. We need to deliver on this. I'm going to continue to work across the aisle Tom Suozzi, who is aiming to represent Huntington next year in Congress, either him or LaPetri, but if it's Suozzi, I want to have friends on the other side of the aisle who are as committed to this as I am.
Yeah, he's very passionate about this.
Yeah, we need follow through in his party, because those folks left us at the altar on February 14th.
Yeah,
they told us that they were going to be there for us, and they weren't anywhere for us on that date. We need to build more consensus, more coalitions. We're going to give it another shot here in the next Congress, hopefully. Very pleased that President Trump has had a new and different view on this. I'd like to claim a little credit that the fights that we've had as Republicans over the last year or so, being so passionate about this issue, has gotten some folks in my party to have a different view on this. So we're optimistic on SALT moving forward.
That's great.
Got to get it done.
That's great. So crime-wise, I just want to let you know, I don't know if you're aware of this.
Yeah.
The only Venezuelan gang member that was arrested on Long Island was arrested in Huntington Station.
Yeah. This goes back to the border issue.
It's very concerning for SCPD and for the residents. So we run the neighborhood watch here down Huntington. So
I'm endorsed by all the Suffolk County police unions, the corrections officers, the deputy sheriffs, firefighters, and a bunch of other first responders. They've all endorsed me in this race because they recognize that we have to have accountability on this issue. That we live on Long Island for a couple of reasons. Many of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents came here likely from Brooklyn or Queens or somewhere else, and they came to the suburbs of New York to likely have a bigger property, maybe you want a little lawn that you can mow, but a safer property, better schools, and that's why we came east to the New York suburbs. Right. Yeah. And we want to preserve that quality of life. Key to that is public safety. We have an awesome police forces. Maybe some of you guys live in villages with your own village cops. God bless. Whatever it is, that public safety is so important to us. Yeah. The federal role, I think, is twofold. One, getting money to the local police departments. And I've gotten a lot of money buying police cars in particular to ensure that we offset some of those costs here locally. But also, federal policy as it relates to that border is the origin of a lot of this. You mentioned that gang member, international gang member, could have been stopped at the border. But they're letting these folks through, not vetting them, they're feigning asylum. They're repositioning them into the interior of the country, many of them to around here, especially the 5 boroughs in New York. This whole process needs to be cleaned. I've called for stronger laws on the deportation of violent criminals, especially, violent immigrant criminals, especially. If you're here on a visa, if you're here illegally and you're not a citizen and you're committing violent crimes, I think you should be gone. And everybody, Republican and Democrat, should be able to join in supporting that effort.
Yeah. What measures would you take to reduce gun violence?
Yeah.
This is a hot topic. We got a lot of hot potatoes on this.
Yes. I think I said before, my wife is a public school teacher. I have 3 kids, 15, 13, and 10. They all go to school. And we hear about some of these shootings throughout the country. There's some real anxiety in my family, with my wife in particular. She has to go through some of these drills on how to keep herself and her kids safe. And there's legitimate anxiety that folks are having on this issue, and a whole of government response is required. Too often this conversation is dominated by the extremes, but there should be very good bipartisan agreement on 2 main areas. We've been fighting this issue for 20, 30 years without general success. 2 main areas upon which we should definitely agree is a larger access to mental health. It seems to me that most of these school shooters have the same profile. Yeah. They have the same feel, they have the same approach, they have the same background. These things could be analyzed better through mental health. They should be dealt with earlier through mental health. The federal government ought to make it easier to access mental health facilities. One of the things I've been trying to do is telehealth. There are certain federal laws and regulations that limit the reimbursement for telehealth. We should relieve those burdens upon them. If you want to get professional access for your kid and Zoom in or somehow FaceTime in to a practitioner, the federal government should facilitate that. That's one. 2 is where school districts want it, and some Long Island school districts have opted into this, where you want federal dollars to make sure that your school is safer from these insane wackos who are shooting it up. The federal government should send you dollars to ensure that it's tougher for these bad guys to access. You don't have to be an 11-year Navy veteran to know bad guys typically want to hurt weak targets. Yep. Bad guys don't look at the harder targets. They look elsewhere. So we should be able to keep our kids safe where the school boards want it. School boards elected by the public want it. The feds ought to be able to offset some of those costs.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. How do you plan to address the opioid epidemic and substance abuse problem in our community? We're all impacted.
Yeah. Like most of the answers to the federal government, it usually comes to money and policy. So let's talk about money. We need to ensure that our local governments are well funded, our police departments are well funded, trained and equipped. I think that's very important. I've taken a large role in getting Suffolk County more funding. I've gotten $150 million back to Suffolk County, specifically my district, to offset the costs of local government so they have more budgets to do things like fight things like the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
But I would also say this. Let's go back to the southern border and what's happening right now. We know this. We know that fentanyl is being manufactured in China, being brought to Mexico and smuggled across our southern border. The more porous that border is, as it is now, the more of those illegal drugs can come through. One of those two bipartisan border bills I passed was the Detect Xylazine and Fentanyl Act, which would give federal law enforcement more resources at the border to tackle this issue. Fortunately, it got bipartisan support. I do expect that to ultimately pass the Senate. So from a policy perspective, we need to get our border stronger. There's some, like I said earlier, there are some bipartisan incremental things that we could do, like my Stop Fentanyl and Xylazine Act, which was supported by both parties, just one of 12 bipartisan immigration bills that we passed this year. But also, we need executive action by this or the next president to secure that border better. President Biden, by a stroke of a pen, undid 64 very effective Trump-era policies that were generally keeping our border safe. I tuned into CNN a night or two ago. I heard the vice president narrating her view a little bit on the border. Anderson Cooper, I think, did a heck of a job asking the vice president, hey, what's your view on this, that, or the other thing? And he pinned it on the wall, which I don't think is the only solution. A wall in and of itself is not going to secure our southern border, but having been to the southern border 4 times, I recognize that some barrier, wall or a fence or whatnot, is a necessary impediment to folks just merely walking across that southern border, which miles and miles and miles at a time are unprotected, undeterred, where migrants can just walk across the border. And you go to my social media, you have some of the video of me being at one of those fenceless, wallless parts of the border that goes for miles and miles. Some fence, some wall is a good idea. I was disappointed when Anderson Cooper asked the vice president, in the past you said that the wall was evil and it was racist and everything else, but now you say that you might support it, but what do you think? And she kind of equivocated. I think we should be honest and say that, hey, listen, in our own homes, we have walls, we have fences, we have gates. There are some things that we lock our doors. There are things that you want to do to ensure we protect what's most valuable to us. That ought not to be demonized on our southern border too. I think that the wall is an incremental part of a larger solution too.
Back to mental health, one of the things that's a major issue around here is it's very difficult to find mental health providers that take insurance because the insurance subsidy for them is so tiny.
Yeah.
It's not even a living wage. So just putting that on your radar. I don't know what you could do policy-wise for that. And then the xylazine, is there a way that you can classify, I don't even know if this happens federally, that you can classify drugs as illicit and in that category that forces New York to treat it like this is equal to danger as fentanyl? You know, like kind of overarch that and not leave it in the state's hands because...
On your first question on reimbursement rates, as they typically relate to Medicare, yes, we will continue to try to improve the reimbursement rates of medical services as they relate to federal programs like that, like Medicare. To your second question of xylazine, yes. The feds and the state governments need to keep up with these monsters who are developing new drugs that are more addictive and more poisonous. So each time some of these monsters develop these new drugs concurrently, we need to ensure that we have laws on the books in particular. I've spoken with DA Ray Tierney, also a St. Anthony's graduate.
Really?
Yes.
That's great.
John Kennedy too. He's the other guy in local government who's a St. Anthony's graduate.
Yeah, I met him. I like him.
Yeah. Nevertheless, he's identified this issue quite well to ensure that he has the laws in the books to properly prosecute folks who have these new deadly addictive drugs. So yes, there is a role for government to play. Most of it, I understand, to be in state government.
It is, and in a way, I mean, I'm just throwing out my opinion here, which may or may not be unpopular, but as with the Neighborhood Watch, like the xylazine thing has been around for years and it takes forever. Like when there's something like that, that's such a massive health, something that's so deadly for everyone. can the federal government step in and help kick that ball just to get it going for the states? Like give them some kind of like, you have to deal with this. You can't kick this down the road. You have to deal with this.
I was a state senator's chief of staff for 2 years, and I learned that education, awareness, and enforcement are all part of the umbrella of ways to ensure that we protect our folks. That yes, we need to ensure that we adopt laws that are commensurate with the poison that's being put out there, but simultaneously we have a role to educate and make people aware. And we have platforms throughout the day and night, where social media, press conferences, and everything in between, email lists, that we can ensure that we are properly educating and informing the community on these illicit drugs and their effects, concurrent with establishing new and stronger and better laws to hold criminals accountable. I think that there is a balance to be struck there. We can be very aggressive on both.
I mean, they can cooperate. We need to cooperate. Our governments have to cooperate for these things that are so detrimental to the neighbors. All right. So we did talk about economy, and you talked about the salt taxes. How do you plan to promote job creation and economic growth in our area? We did talk about your plans somewhat for that, touch on that, but job creation.
Yeah, job creation from a federal perspective, a lot has to do with taxes. And the lower the taxes are, the more job creators can do to invest in their businesses. We saw a number of years ago, despite that 2017 tax bill not having salt in it, and for that reason I would have voted against it. Nevertheless, there were some aspects of that bill that helped spark and stimulate to the economy, where job creators helped create more and more jobs, and we had an economy that was on the uptick. Employment was down, wealth was down, the affordability was good. So I subscribe to the concept of less taxes, helps spur more growth, both nationally and locally. And I know a lot of my fellow lawmakers here, and there's 8 towns, by the way, in my congressional district. Huntington is a very important part of that 8-town process. But nevertheless, it's a whole of government approach. The feds need to do better on taxes in particular, but also our state folks and our local folks also have to ensure that through taxes and regulation we make it easier for folks to create jobs. I'm on the Small Business Committee in Washington. I passed more bills, like I said earlier, than 95% of Congress. 4 of the bills I passed were out of the Small Business Committee, which helps ensure, each one of them helps ensure that small businesses can have better access to federal support. One in particular is the Plain Language and Contracting Act that says this, that you shouldn't have to hire a lawyer or an accountant merely to apply for a federal grant or a federal contract. That too often a hard-working business, whether it has 5 employees or 50, and they want to apply for a grant or a contract, they get an application whose instructions are 300 pages thick. And they say, you know what, I got 5 employees, I got 20 employees, I don't have the capacity to digest that application process, and thus they just don't apply. And yet the bigger ones with 500 employees, 1,000 employees, they have a lawyer, an accountant, or whoever else on staff, no problem, they'll figure out a way to apply, and it squeezes the little guy out. So my Plain Language and Contracting Act says this, keep it simple. Keep it simple. Make it less voluminous, make it more straightforward so that regular folks, regular small businesses can apply and win these grants and contracts. And we got a lot of support for that, bipartisan. I think it might have been even unanimous out of the House. We expect the Senate to pass it as well and for it to become law so that regular Main Street businesses can avail themselves of federal resources.
That's great. Okay, great. Thank you. I want to touch on, we have the housing question, which is important, but I want to skip that actually right now and get back to it. But the Northport VA Hospital, as a veteran, have you walked through the halls?
Yeah, a bunch of times.
Have you seen what's going on?
Yeah, a bunch of times.
Did you know the whole wing was closed that was providing mental health services to them?
Yeah.
We need more.
Yep.
We need to take care of our veterans.
I'll say a couple of things to start. I think I said earlier I used to be a member of Congress as veterans caseworker. I used to answer the phone for local residents who were having issues both with the local VA or the national VA process. And what I learned was this dichotomy, that yes, many of my fellow veterans are frustrated with the process, but I also learned there's a lot of awesome people with huge hearts who are working in that VA medical center here in Northport and elsewhere in the system elsewhere. A lot of the employees there really care and love and deeply appreciate our veterans.
Absolutely.
At the same time, Congress has a responsibility to have oversight and accountability. We ought to haul in continuously, especially the upper level administrators who are not properly administering the care and services that they are compelled to provide for my fellow veterans. And we also need to make sure that we have the funding for them as well.
They need infrastructure.
Yeah.
They need help with the buildings. They need loads of support with that. And of course, the rates of suicide among veterans is
Yep.
staggering, and there's a lack of housing for them.
Yep.
Do you plan to address these issues in any way?
Yeah, so I'll tell a couple things. I do think that we need to cut federal spending in order to solve some of the inflation issue, but we made sure to protect a couple of different areas where we cut from the budget in 2023. The Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023, go Google it back home, please. We cut $2.1 trillion over 10 years of federal spending, but while we did so, we protected Social Security, Medicare, VA spending, defense spending, and Homeland Security spending. These are things that we thought our values were best in, and we wanted to ensure that we protected those issues. You're asking me questions about, in particular, things about veteran suicide and housing. We need to make sure that that is not on the chopping block, that we deliver on our promise to our nation's veterans, many of whom put their lives on the line for our great country, something that keeps us the greatest country the world has ever known. We need to continue on that promise, and that usually means federal dollars.
Right.
That to me is where the rubber meets the road. You can say a lot of things on the campaign trail and everywhere else, but it's when you put your vote card in and you vote yes or no on a budget. That's your true value of where you think on something. And when we cut that spending, we made sure we protected veteran spending when we did so.
And the process for them, when they request the assistance of, hey, for 10 years the ceiling's been falling in on this area, they need to, it not be to, you know, they have to have more faster response, easier way. Do you want to talk about cutting out the nonsense with the contracts? Make it easier for them to
and especially hire local contractors as well. There's been a process in the past where some corners were looking to be cut to have cheaper, in two senses, cheaper financially, but also lesser effective labor come from elsewhere. I also believe that when we do have these infrastructure investments by the federal government in places like the Northport VA, that we have good local qualified labor perform this work so that it is not shoddy, so that it is quality, so that it does last a while. So that
veteran laborers.
Yeah, and there's points that you get there too to apply for those contracts as well if you're a veteran too. So well, we're going to continue to work together, but I always want to give a shout out to the individuals who work at the medical center. They're awesome people.
We know a lot of them. We have a lot of them in our group, a lot of the nurses, and it's
amazing people.
Yes, absolutely spectacular.
Doing God's work.
People, yes. All right, back to housing. Our community's in the midst of a housing crisis. What ideas or plans do you have to address this problem? We need all kinds of housing.
So three big ones. SALT. We talked about SALT a bit ago. I don't know if you want me to go into SALT again. I could talk for hours about SALT if you'd like. But why don't we talk about the low-income tax credit and the first-time homebuyer tax credit. There are things the federal government can do to make it easier for folks here on Long Island to afford homes, especially your first-time home. There are things that we can do, and those are the three biggest ones. I'd love to talk for an hour about SALT, but I think you guys get it. We're going to continue to fight.
We have to deal with
fight on SALT. But those other tax credits ought to be preserved as well. The Fed's major tax bill that was instituted in 2017 comes due next year. So everything's going to be on the table. And we're going to have to balance a lot of these priorities. The top priority will, for me, be SALT, unless there's a very reasonable accommodation in SALT. I'm going to be a no on whose ever tax bill it is, whether Republicans have control of the House or Democrats have control of the House. I'll be a no on any tax bill that does not have legitimate, reasonable relief on us for the state and local tax deduction. My bill is 60 and 120. That if you're an individual, the first $60,000 you pay in state income and property taxes. If you're an individual, the first $60K is deductible. That makes it whole for about 98% of us. And if you're a married couple, the first $120,000 of your state income and property taxes is deductible. That too makes it totally good for 98% of us as well. There are things that we can do.
Than it is now.
Oh yeah, it's only $10,000 for individuals right now. Many of us are capped at that. $10,000 is probably half of what many of you guys are paying in your property taxes. Who are tuning in now, we need to do a lot better at that.
Yeah, and I cannot forget to tell you this because I know you're going to run. It seems stupid, but it's very important. The HUD Affordable Housing Formula, you have to change the name. Don't call it affordable
Nobody
anymore.
understands it.
This is a federal issue, because affordable is subjective. So when they go, oh, it's the affordable housing lottery, the entire community blows up in irateness because that is not affordable. So it needs to be changed to workforce housing formula. If you could maybe do that for us?
There is a lot of injustice in some of these formula.
Right.
And it was apparent to me, not only what you just mentioned, but a couple of weeks ago, we're dealing with some folks who are victims of flooding, and they're trying to tap into state and federal relief on that flooding, and there's income caps for that, which are like way below what any of us could ever survive here on Long Island. So there needs to be a holistic approach to that. The one I'm referencing with respect to floods is something that comes out of Albany, so I'm trying to leverage my state colleagues just a little bit to get them to increase caps like that, because on that one, like the flood reimbursement, I think it's like $110,000 for a household, which doesn't get you by in most places on Long Island, especially if you have a family, especially if you have kids. It's tough. We need to do better at the HUD stuff, at those income caps as well.
Yeah, and we need more like incentives for apartments and things like that.
I will say this.
We don't have the supply that we need.
I will say this. I don't think the federal or state government ought to be the ones making those zoning decisions.
With zoning, yes, but maybe tax incentives
to
encourage, to make it more less expensive for a developer to create a project like that, because there are areas that are zoned that will allow that, and no one's creating anything because it's not.
I just want to be absolutely clear.
Yeah.
I think the federal government has a role in a lot of international issues, but limited on domestic issues. And I used to be a village trustee, and zoning was in my lane there.
Yeah.
Zoning decisions should not be made by the federal government or the state government. Local.
Keep them out of our time.
Right. Good. God bless. Let's all agree on that.
All right. Here we go. Hot potato. How do you feel about federally reinstating the Roe versus Wade abortion rights?
So,
as opposed to it's at the state level now.
Let me be very clear on my position, because there's a lot of lying going on in the campaign, and my opponent has spent millions of dollars lying about my position.
We've seen a few commercials.
Yeah, just one or two. And he clips like a very small portion of a larger statement, which I think that 80% of us back at home would agree with my position. My position is this: I do not support a national abortion ban. I'm for the exceptions of rape, incest, and life of the mother, and I do not think that the government ought to intervene the first trimester at all. And I also acknowledge it's now a state's issue. And my position has been the states and the voters of the states ought to manage this issue. An important issue. I'm married to a good, strong, independent woman. I have 3 awesome daughters. And nobody in my household wants me to be onerous on this issue whatsoever. So I don't only want the voters to continue to trust me, I want my family to continue to trust me. I don't want to be involved in anything onerous on this issue whatsoever. And in fact, my record proves that. This year in Congress, some of my colleagues from the far right wanted to ban the mailing of mifepristone, an abortion drug. They wanted to ban the mailing of it across state lines. And they embedded that language in the agricultural appropriations bill. I was one of just about a dozen House members to stand up and say, no, we're not doing that. The position is this is a state's issue. Let the states and more importantly, the voters of the states rule on this issue. The Fed should not be coming in with an iron fist on this issue whatsoever. So I blocked my own party's bill that would have banned mifepristone, consistent with my position on this matter. I think it's a woman's right to choose. The Fed should not be involved in this. Let's not have abortion politics any longer. There are important issues, and this is one of them. And I want people out there who have concerns about this to hear it from me in particular. I will not change the policies in the federal government whatsoever. I haven't. I won't. The talk about a national abortion ban is garbage, and I would never, ever, ever be a part of it.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, drug addiction and mental health. Do you think all health insurance providers should cover these services, specifically addiction treatment, like a lot of the insurance companies get away with not covering it, and then people are not getting access to treatment? This could be something where it's like, I know that if you mandate this, then your rates go up in various areas, so it's like a little bit of a balance, but it is a definite need for the health of our community. How do you feel about it?
I think most of this is dealt with on a state level, but to the extent that it's dealt with on the federal level, especially with Medicare, there's great wisdom in investing in some of these matters, because if you don't tackle them early, they become larger issues, not just personally for people, but they become more costly later on. So I think that not only should we analyze this issue from a compassionate perspective, that a legitimate person with a legitimate need needs that help, but also from an ROI perspective. If you deny them that help to start and you save a couple of grand from an insurance company perspective, you're only going to have to deal with a much larger issue later on. So this is much like the infrastructure question.
Oh, you and your logic.
Sorry about that. It's pay me now or pay me later. And the later is often going to be much, much more. So compassion and ROI should absolutely be, from a governmental perspective, from a policy-making perspective, a large part of how we approach this.
Very good. Yeah, getting back to the flooding.
Yeah.
As you know, I mean, in your own, you're in Smithtown, right?
I cover Huntington.
Oh, no, you live in Northport. Okay.
I don't live in Northport. I live in Amityville.
You're right. You're right there. Where the Nissaquag River and Blydenburg, it's gone.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, plus all the houses that got flooded, completely wiped out, feet of mud. We have major flooding issues from rainstorms here in Huntington. What solutions do you propose to manage it that the federal can support? And I'd like to throw in there I know we didn't discuss this. They're gonna get mad at me. You ready? You know the
can't whisper.
Asheroken.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it. Absolutely, Mayor Letica's on me calls me once a week on it. Yep, 100%. I'm good.
So we'd like an update on that.
Good.
We haven't heard the latest on that, but that's a constant problem too, where also first responders can't get to them.
Yep. So let's talk about policy and money, because again, that's generally how the feds approach important matters. So from a policy perspective, I'm part of the Conservative Climate Caucus, part of a reasonable group of Republicans who understand climate change is real, understand that we have a responsibility to ensure we're putting less pollutants in the air that damage our environment. So we get that. The caucus is growing and growing and growing, and we have been able to exert positive influence on folks who want to have a good balance between investing in things like clean energy, but also not wrecking our economy at the same point. My opponent has support of a bill that, I'm being signaled for time, so we're going to wrap this up here in a few minutes, unfortunately. My opponent has supported a bill that takes $280 billion from Medicare and puts them to electric vehicle tax credits. So I do think that there are incentives that we should offer towards ensuring that we have a better environment. But we also have programs, commitments that we've made to people like Medicare, like Social Security. We shouldn't be taking from them to do these things. So I want to make sure that you clear my position there as well. Nevertheless, if we don't do anything about China and Venezuela and other producers who are just spewing more and more of their pollutants in the air, America could be clean, 100% clean on everything. We could be all wind, all solar, and have zero fossil fuels, whatever else. But if we don't get those trading partners over whom we have leverage to do better at what they're doing, we're just spitting into the wind. So I think that we need to, when we negotiate these trade deals with nations like China, we need to have in those trade deals a higher standards for them, because this is a global effort. What we do here matters to the world, but what China is doing, they're the largest producer of the pollutants, is very important as well. We need to talk more about that. But also, so I said policy, also said money. The money needs to flow here to invest in infrastructure. And we need to ensure that the $1.1 trillion that was passed in the Infrastructure Act a couple of years ago before I was in Congress, I would have voted for it. I wasn't in Congress, but I would have voted for it.
That helped us.
But it hasn't helped us yet. I mean, the money hasn't flowed to Suffolk County.
Actually come all the way
not to
down
the
yet,
exptent of the expectations or how fair it should be.
because that partly funded our coming sewers in Huntington Station.
So,
I mean, if there's a bigger nut, we'll take it. But
a lot of zeros on 1.1 trillion.
Yeah.
And that we got some sewers here or a little road there isn't enough.
We were like so excited because we got nothing for so long. But no, that there's more coming. Yes, please.
Yeah. And we'd love to do this the polite way, and we've asked politely numerous times via letter and other advocacies towards the state government and how the money flows is. The $1.1 trillion was given to state governments for their dissemination, but like many things here in this state, there's some politics being played, some districts being starved of that funding. Mine is one of those who is being starved, and we're going to continue to advocate and make it a little hairy in the future. Just want to put everybody on notice, but I'm going to fight like hell to ensure that the fair part of that 1.1 trillion comes to us here in Suffolk County.
That's great. Yeah, Assemblyman Keith Brown was telling us about a plan to redo all the the rainwater catch system. That there are solutions for just some of the coastal, like Northport, and that we need the funding. And that's what that would be.
Helps our water quality, helps
everybody, and that would pave the way for healthier generations to come. I know your hard stop was 12:15.
Yeah,
we are at that time. We do have the I don't know if you want to take a look. There may
let's do one. Let's do one more. But
wanted to do one more.
Let's do one more.
I'm going to let you go ahead. Which one do you want to do? We have the foreign policy one. I mean, the border one we touched on. I don't know if you were comfortable with your answer on that. And then the other was foreign policy. And I'm like,
who doesn't love any with foreign policy, especially a guy who was overseas a few different times? Iran is probably my answer to this. The question on the paper is, what are the biggest national security threats facing our country, and how would you address them? I said this earlier, peace through strength. We want to be in less wars, not more. We don't want to have to absorb all the nation's conflicts, but that is achieved through being strong. This is achieved through strategic deterrence. Yes, aircraft carriers and bombers and troops in different places keeps our adversaries at bay, keeps commerce flowing, keeps the world at ease. And when administrations continue to appease adversaries, be it Russia, be it Iran, be it China, it only invites more and more aggression. We need to get back to a point Reagan-esque to ensure that our adversaries know that we mean business when it comes to endangering us and our allies as well. NATO is a strong alliance. We should remain in NATO. Nevertheless, 16 of the 31 NATO nations don't do their fair share. I hear a lot from my friends from the other side of the aisle talking about doing their fair share. NATO nations, 16 of the 31, do less than their 2% target. The deal is, if you want to be in NATO, if you want to be part of this awesome alliance that keeps us all safe and strong, you got to spend 2% of your nation's gross domestic product on your defense so that we can collectively be strong. The U.S. spends 3.5%. We choose to do way more than 2%. That's part of a value system. But more than half of the NATO nations are doing less than 2%. Our commander-in-chief, our secretary of state, our diplomats need to exercise leverage, which, by the way, doesn't cost us $1.
Yeah.
We should just be able to be in the rooms, whether it's pleasantly or otherwise, ensuring that our allies and partners do more. That, I think, will keep us more safe.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this.
Cool.
Thank you.
Happy to do it.
And thank you to your wife and your children, who I know are sacrificing tremendous amount of time with you and your family as you serve the community, as you did as a veteran as well.
Yeah.
So
thank you for saying that.
We want to thank you so much and pass that along to them too.
Will do.
Because it means a lot. Their sacrifice means a lot.
Sure
too.
does. Sure does.
Yeah. So you got places to go. So
Amen.
Thanks so much, neighbors. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with you in just a little while.